Okay, so you want to dive deeper.
Yeah.
You want to do it quickly, right? Like
Well,
you don't have a lot of time to mess around. You just want to get to the good stuff right away.
to the point.
So we are right there with you. And today we're tackling something a lot of you have said is a big deal to you.
Yeah.
You want to get better at speaking English,
Right.
especially if you're just starting out.
Yeah.
So you know we like to go deep,
Yes.
and we found some really interesting stuff to dig into.
Absolutely.
For this episode, it comes from an episode of Speakeasy with Emma,
Right.
and it features a language coach named David.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
So think of this as like having direct access to a real expert,
Right.
somebody who's worked with tons of English learners,
Yeah, exactly.
but particularly people who are just beginning their journey with spoken English.
Yes.
And, we want to make this as useful and clear for you as possible.
For sure.
So our mission today is to extract from this expert conversation with David the most crucial,
Right.
the immediately usable pieces of advice that will give beginner English speakers like the most effective path forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you're ready to find your voice in English?
Yes.
Where does he say you even begin?
Well, he's pretty firm on this one.
Okay.
It all starts with listening.
Listening.
And this is key, I think.
Okay.
It's not just about hearing English words.
Right.
It's about actively listening to the rhythm,
Uh,
and the everyday phrases.
I see.
Think about it like this.
Okay.
Before you can build a house, you need a solid foundation, right?
Yeah.
Well, for speaking English, your ear is that first tool you need to really train.
So your ear is like the foundation.
Yeah, it's just like the groundwork you lay.
You got to build upon.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
So he didn't just say listen more, though.
No.
He gave some really specific examples of what to listen to.
Right.
What kind of stuff did he say was particularly helpful?
Well, I thought his variety was really valuable. He recommended things like podcasts, designed for English language learners.
Right.
Audiobooks, maybe starting with simpler stories.
Yeah.
YouTube channels. There are tons of them out there for English learning.
Right.
And even incorporating things like movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
It's about creating this immersive environment
Oh.
where you're constantly exposed to the sounds and the patterns
Right.
of English,
Yeah.
in different contexts.
So just being surrounded by it as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And that constant exposure really fine-tunes your ear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about getting comfortable with the natural flow of the language.
Right.
The way native speakers stress certain words link others together.
Uh-huh.
And of course, it's a great way to start absorbing the correct pronunciation
Yeah.
and those common everyday phrases that native speakers just use without even thinking.
Exactly.
Now, for a lot of beginners, though, the idea of actually opening their mouth and speaking,
Yeah.
that can feel like a huge hurdle.
I know. I think that's a really common feeling.
Yeah.
That fear of making mistakes or sounding silly, that can be a real roadblock.
Totally.
But David's advice here, I found to be really direct
Okay.
and very encouraging, I think, for anyone feeling that anxiety.
He just says don't overthink it.
Yeah, it's just start talking.
Speak as much as you can,
Right.
even if you know you're going to make mistakes.
Exactly. He emphasizes getting that volume of speaking up.
Volume.
Yeah, like the amount of speaking you do.
Yeah.
Even if the quality at first isn't perfect,
Right.
the important thing is to break through that initial silence
Uh-huh.
and start getting your vocal cords used to actually forming,
Yeah.
English words and sentences.
Yeah.
And he had some practical suggestions for doing this.
Okay, let's talk about those concrete steps.
Yeah.
What does he recommend for getting over that fear and starting to actually speak more?
Well, he suggests, like, actively seeking out opportunities to speak.
Okay.
Finding a language partner, someone who's also learning maybe through online platforms or something.
Right.
Joining conversation groups,
Yeah.
either online or in your community,
Yeah.
where the pressure is a little lower and everyone's in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
And even something as simple as talking to yourself in English throughout the day.
I love that one.
Yeah,
I think that one is so underrated,
it's great.
talking to yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's no pressure.
Yeah.
You're not worried about,
Yeah, you're your own audience.
yeah, you're not worried about somebody judging you.
Right.
And you can really practice putting those sentences together and just getting used to the sound of your own voice
Yeah,
in English.
that's a good point.
Now, once you do start speaking,
Yeah.
pronunciation is something that a lot of learners, naturally become concerned about.
Yeah. And it's a valid concern.
Uh-huh.
I mean, clearer pronunciation
Yeah,
really helps you communicate effectively.
of course.
You might have a good grasp of vocabulary and grammar.
Right.
Right.
But if your pronunciation is difficult to understand,
Yeah.
it can lead to misunderstandings.
Mm-hmm.
So David highlights this technique.
Okay.
I think is really effective for tackling this.
Yeah, you're talking about shadowing.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more about how that works?
Absolutely. So the core of shadowing is active mimicry.
Mimicry.
Yeah, it's not just passively listening to someone speak English.
Right.
It's about actively trying to repeat what they're saying, almost at the same time.
Wow.
You're mimicking their intonation,
Okay.
even their pace.
Got it.
So you're like a vocal echo.
So it's like you're right on their heels
Yeah.
as they're saying it.
Exactly. And for beginners, this can really help to train the muscles
Oh.
involved in English speech.
It's a bit of workout
Yeah.
for your mouth.
Kind of. Yeah. Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And did he mention any helpful resources for practicing shadowing
Yeah.
and improving your pronunciation? He specifically recommended apps like Elsa Speak,
Okay.
which can give you feedback
Oh,
on your
gosh.
pronunciation.
That's helpful.
Yeah. And websites like Forvo,
Forvo.
where you can hear native speakers pronounce
Wow.
individual words really clearly.
Okay.
So you can really focus on specific sounds
Yeah.
or words that you're finding challenging.
Right.
So these kinds of tools, I think, can be really valuable
That's great.
for that focus practice.
Awesome.
Now, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about building your English vocabulary.
Okay.
A lot of people, when they're just starting out, they think it's all about just memorizing these huge lists of words.
Right.
Yeah, which can be really overwhelming.
It can be.
And let's be honest, it doesn't always translate
Right.
into being able to actually use those words naturally
No. That
when they're
doesn't.
speaking.
You got to know how to use the word.
Exactly.
Not just know the word.
David really challenges that more traditional approach.
So what's his take then?
Well, his recommendation is to learn vocabulary in a way that's much more practical,
Okay.
tied to real-world situations.
So give me an example.
Okay, so instead of just learning the word travel,
Okay.
you focus on learning common phrases,
Okay.
like I love traveling or I'm planning a trip.
I see.
The key here is to see how words function within actual sentences
Right.
and common expressions.
So you see it in its natural habitat
Exactly.
until it's used.
Yeah, and this method helps you remember the new words more effectively
Ah.
because they have context, but it also shows you exactly how to use them
Yeah.
correctly when you're speaking.
Got it.
So it's about learning usable chunks of language.
I like that.
Usable chunks.
Rather than trying to piece together sentences.
Right.
Word by word.
It's like building with blocks. You
Yeah.
got the blocks, you put them together, you got something.
Exactly. You've got these prefabricated units
Right.
that you can just pull out
Yeah.
and use immediately.
I love that. And that makes so much sense for speaking fluently.
It really does.
Yeah.
And speaking of fluency,
Yeah.
David touched on something that I think is a real turning point
Yeah.
for a lot of learners.
Yeah.
And that is making that switch from
Yes.
constantly translating in your head
Oh, yeah.
to actually thinking directly in English.
This is huge.
This is a big one.
Yeah, this is a really significant step towards achieving
Yeah.
more natural and fluid speech.
Yes.
That back and forth translation
Mm-hmm.
can really slow you down.
It's exhausting.
It is. It's like running a marathon in your mind.
And so what's his tip?
Well, it's interesting how simple the initial advice is.
Okay.
It's about creating direct associations between English words
Mm-hmm.
and the things they represent.
Okay.
So, when you see a chair,
Okay.
instead of thinking the word for chair in your native language
Yeah.
and then translating it to chair,
Mm-hmm.
you just immediately think chair.
Chair.
Yeah, it might sound simple,
It does.
but it's a fundamental shift
Right.
in how your brain is processing the language.
So you're cutting out that middleman.
Yeah, you're
Oh.
cutting out that translation step.
Right.
And he gave a really practical exercise
Okay. Tell me about that.
for reinforcing this
Yeah.
that anyone can do.
Mm-hmm.
He said, narrate your day in English.
Just like talk about what you're doing.
Yeah, even if it's just silently in your head.
Yeah.
Describe what you're doing, what you see around you.
Love it.
It's a way to constantly immerse yourself
Right.
internally
In English.
in English
Yeah.
and practice forming those sentences
Yeah.
without the pressure of speaking out loud.
So good.
Yeah,
Now, we can't talk about learning a new language
right.
without addressing grammar.
Yeah, of course.
Which, for many beginners, can feel like this huge, intimidating set of rules.
I know the grammar.
It's a beast.
It's a lot.
It can be really overwhelming, especially when you're just starting out and you're just trying to get your basic thoughts across.
Yeah.
So what's David's perspective on grammar
Well,
for beginners?
his core principle,
Okay.
which I think is so important for
Yeah.
beginners to remember,
Yeah.
is communication first,
Uh-huh.
perfection later.
Okay.
So at the initial stages,
Yeah.
the most important thing
Yeah.
is to be able to convey your meaning.
To get your point across.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even if your grammar isn't completely flawless.
I like that.
Yeah.
What stands out to me is his emphasis on, like, really zeroing in on the basic building blocks of sentence structure.
Exactly.
For first, like subject, verb, object,
Right.
you know,
Like the core.
the core.
Yeah.
Rather than getting bogged down in these complex tenses and clauses
Not right away.
right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right.
And he really reassures learners that their grasp of grammar
Mm-hmm.
will naturally improve over time
Okay.
as they get more practice and are exposed to more correct English
Right.
through listening and reading.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about building that solid foundation,
Yeah.
being able to make yourself understood,
Yeah.
and then those finer points will come.
The nuances will come later.
Exactly.
Oh.
Now, finally, and this is so important
Okay.
for any kind of learning,
Yeah.
David talks about staying motivated
Yes.
and finding enjoyment
Yes.
in the process.
Because if it feels like a chore
right.
or a constant struggle,
It's going to be so much harder
yeah.
to stay consistent
Mm-hmm.
and make progress.
You're not going to want to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So keeping those motivation levels up
Mm-hmm.
is key for long-term success.
Absolutely.
And all of his suggestions are about making English learning
Yeah.
something that you actually look forward to
Right.
rather than something that you dread.
Exactly.
So,
So give us some examples of how beginners can make their English learning more enjoyable.
okay.
More.
He suggests actively incorporating things that you already enjoy doing.
Okay.
So if you love watching TV shows,
Yeah.
watch your favorite shows in English,
Uh-huh.
maybe with subtitles at first,
Okay.
and then try watching without them
Yeah.
as your level improves.
Right.
If you enjoy music, listen to English songs.
Okay.
Try singing along.
Uh-huh.
You could explore language-based games
Yeah.
or connect with other learners online or in person
Right.
who share your hobbies.
So find people who are also learning,
Yeah.
who like the same stuff you like.
Exactly.
You can talk about it in English.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
It's about weaving English into the fabric of your life,
Mm-hmm.
in ways that are genuinely appealing
Right.
and engaging.
It shouldn't feel separate.
No, it should feel like part of your everyday life.
Yeah, it should be integrated.
Yeah. And when learning feels fun,
Yeah.
it creates those positive associations,
Yeah.
and it makes the whole process so much more sustainable.
I love that. Okay, so we've really gone deep here
Yeah, we have.
into David's expert advice.
Yeah, for those just starting to speak English.
So for our listener out there,
Yeah.
what are the absolute key takeaways?
Okay, so the essential principles are,
Mm-hmm.
number one, make active listening a priority.
Okay,
That's your foundation.
got it.
Number two, don't let the fear of making mistakes stop you from speaking.
Speak.
Yeah, practice is key.
Practice, practice, practice.
Exactly.
Okay.
Number three, actively work on your pronunciation
Okay.
using techniques like shadowing.
Right.
Number four, focus on learning vocabulary within the context of useful phrases,
Right.
those chunks.
Those chunks.
Yeah.
Got it.
Number five, start making that mental shift towards thinking directly in English.
Uh-huh.
Number six, concentrate on understanding and using basic grammar
Okay.
for effective communication,
Got it.
initially.
Yeah.
And finally, maybe most importantly,
Okay.
find ways to make learning enjoyable,
Yeah.
to keep that motivation strong.
Keep it fun.
Yeah. So some really concrete steps
Yeah.
that our listener can start implementing today,
Today.
right now.
Yes.
So as you're reflecting on all this great advice,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to think about this.
Okay.
Which one of these tips feels like the most accessible,
Right.
the most manageable first step for you
Mm-hmm.
right now?
Yeah.
What's one small change
Mm-hmm.
you can make in your routine
Yeah.
to start putting this into practice?
Yeah. That's a good question to ask yourself.
Because even those small, consistent efforts in any of these areas
Mm-hmm.
will compound over time
They will?
and lead to significant improvements
Yes.
in your English speaking skills.
It's like that snowball effect.
Exactly. It starts small and then it just gets bigger and bigger.
Exactly.
So now go out there
Yes.
and start building that foundation.
Yeah.
You got this.
You do.